They bought my brother a Ferrari the week my college fund disappeared. For 20 years, my parents called it a financial complication, an emergency, something that just happened. It didn't just happen. Someone signed a form. Someone closed an account. Someone decided, 3 weeks before my tuition was due, that a car for their son mattered more than a future for their daughter. I built a career teaching other families never to do what mine did to me. I told myself I'd moved on. Then, 20 years later, over a dinner they swore had no agenda, my parents looked me in the eye and asked me for another $250,000. For the same son, for the same reasons. And this time, I didn't just sit there and understand. This time, I went looking for the truth they buried, and I found it. 20 minutes ago, I stood in front of a room full of strangers and told them the same thing I always tell them. Protect your children equally. Resentment doesn't come from what you give one child. It comes from what you take from another. They nodded. They took notes. A woman in the third row wrote it down twice. I've said that line so many times, I stopped hearing it. Until today, walking to my car when it followed me the whole way home like it finally wanted an answer. My phone rang before I hit the highway. Mom's name on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. We hadn't talked in 3 months, not really. A birthday text, a forwarded recipe, nothing that counted. Brooke, honey. Her voice was warm in that specific way she gets when she wants something, though I didn't let myself think that yet. I was hoping you'd come for dinner Sunday. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. No agenda. I just miss my daughter. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. 4 words I hadn't heard in longer than I wanted to admit. I miss my daughter. Not, I need you. Not your brother. Just miss. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. And some small, stupid 18-year-old part of me spent the next 4 days hoping this was the beginning of something. Sunday came warm and gold, the kind of Scottsdale evening that makes everything look softer than it is. Dad answered the door in his old golf polo, arms already open. There she is. Successful as ever. He hugged me the way he used to when I was small enough to fit against him. Your mother made the pot roast. Inside, everything smelled like it did when I was a kid. Elaine had the good plates out. Harold poured wine and told the story about the time he sold a Bentley to a man in flip-flops, and I laughed because it was actually funny. And for a while, I let myself believe this was just dinner. You've always been the practical one, sweetheart, Elaine said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I don't know where you get it. I try, I said and smiled, because that's what I do. That's why we know you'll understand. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up to why. You'll understand. 2 words I'd heard my whole life. Always right before something was taken from me and handed to someone else. I set my fork down slowly. Understand what? That's when Trevor walked in. 20 minutes late, no apology, dropping into the chair across from me without quite looking at me. 44 years old, and he still had that same boyish slouch, like the world would wait for him. It always had. Hey, Brookie. He reached for the bread like nothing was wrong. I noticed his hand wasn't quite steady. Dad cleared his throat the way he does before he says something he's rehearsed. Trevor's had a rough stretch. He said it carefully, like he was breaking bad news about someone else's family. The business didn't work out the way he planned. The banks aren't exactly lining up to help. How rough? I asked. Trevor still hadn't looked at me. Rough. 250,000 rough, Dad said. The table went quiet in a way that felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced whose turn it was to speak next. We know it's a lot, Mom said gently, but you're in such a good position now, and families help each other. I looked at Trevor. He was staring at his plate like it owed him an explanation. Trevor, I said, you still have the Porsche, the boat. That watch collection you showed me at Christmas. That's not the point, he muttered. It's actually exactly the point. Brooke. Dad's voice sharpened, the way it used to when I was 17 and said something he didn't want to hear. He's already lost enough. Don't make him sell everything he has left just to prove something. I'm not trying to make him prove anything. I'm asking why I'm the first option instead of the last one." Nobody answered that. Mom reached over and patted my hand again, softer this time, like she was smoothing over a wrinkle in a tablecloth. "Families help each other," she said again, like repeating it made it truer. I looked around the table. Dad's jaw was set the way it gets when he's already decided he's right. Mom's eyes were glossy in that way that used to make me apologize for things I hadn't done. And Trevor still hadn't met my eyes once since he sat down. 20 years of Sunday dinners, and I still knew exactly what this feeling was. I just hadn't expected to feel it again tonight, dressed up as a homecoming. "I need to think about it," I said. "Think about it," Dad repeated, like the words didn't make sense to him. "Yes, Brooke, he could lose everything. I heard you the first time." Nobody said anything else for a moment. It was the longest silence that table had held in years, and I let it sit there instead of rushing to fill it the way I always used to. I said goodnight before dessert. Mom hugged me at the door a little too long, like she was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping. Dad told me to drive safe. Trevor didn't get up. The drive home was quiet except for the sound of my own thoughts, circling back to the same place they always did. You'll understand. I'd built an entire career out of teaching other families not to say that sentence to their own children, and somehow it still found its way back to me at my parents' dinner table, 20 years later, wearing a different number. When I got home, I didn't turn on the television or pour a glass of wine like I normally would after a long weekend. I went straight to my study, knelt in front of the safe, and turned the dial from memory. Inside, beneath a folder of tax documents I never look at, was the one thing I kept separate from everything else: worn leather. Soft at the corners from 20 years of being touched and put away, touched and put away. I didn't open it. I just held it in my lap for a while, sitting on the floor of my own study in the dark, feeling the weight of something I thought I'd made peace with. 20 years since they emptied that account. 20 years since I was told I'd understand. And here I was again, being asked to hand over another $250,000 to the same brother, for the same reasons, from the same people who never once explained what happened to the last one. I closed the front door behind me and stood there a moment before I turned on a single lamp instead of the overheads. Some conversations don't belong in bright light. The safe opened the way it always does, quiet and certain, like it's been waiting. I lifted the folder out with both hands, the way you'd lift something that might fall apart if you weren't careful with it. Worn leather, cracked at the fold. 20 years of being opened, closed, and put away again. I sat down on the floor of my study and let myself open it. The acceptance letter was still on top, right where I'd left it. Northwestern, Office of Undergraduate Admission, the paper gone soft and yellow at the edges. Under it, my scholarship offer. Under that, the tuition schedule I'd copied out by hand into a spiral notebook, because back then I didn't trust anything until I'd written it down myself. I remembered writing those numbers. Sitting at the kitchen table at 17 with a calculator and a paycheck stub from the grocery store, mapping out exactly how much I needed to save every month to make it work. I remembered feeling proud of that plan, like I'd built something. Things changed. That's what my father said, 3 weeks before I was supposed to move into my dorm. I was standing in that same kitchen, older now, holding the acceptance packet like it was still going to mean something. "What do you mean?" I'd asked him. He didn't look up from whatever paperwork was in front of him. He never looked up, not once, the whole conversation. My mother answered instead, like she'd been waiting for the chance. "Your brother has an opportunity right now." I remember staring at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part that would make it make sense. "It never came. My tuition is due in 3 weeks," I said. She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "You'll land on your feet." I sat there on my study floor 20 years later and felt that sentence the same way I'd felt it then. Like a door closing somewhere far away, quiet enough that only I could hear it. Back then, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I did math instead. State school. In-state tuition. 2 part-time jobs instead of 1. I remember thinking very clearly that if I just worked hard enough, none of this would matter in the end. Nobody in that house ever asked me if I was okay. They asked if I understood. Trevor was 17 that year. I don't think he even knew what my tuition number was. He wasn't cruel about it. That's the part that still confuses people when I try to explain it. He wasn't gloating. He was just a kid who'd never had to notice what things cost, because somebody always made sure he didn't have to. I remember him poking his head into my room a few days after that conversation, doing that thing where he leaned against the door frame instead of actually coming in. "You okay?" he'd asked. "Fine. Mom said you're going to state instead. That's cool, right? Closer to home." I remember looking at him and understanding, even at 18, that he genuinely believed that. That somewhere in his mind, my change of plans was just a change of plans. Not a theft, not a debt he owed, just something that happened to me, the way weather happens. He never asked why. I don't think it occurred to him that there was a why. I worked the front register at a grocery store on Scottsdale Road for 2 years while I finished my degree in 3, because I couldn't afford the 4th. I took out loans I was still paying off in my 30s. I remember standing behind that register on a Saturday afternoon and looking up to see Trevor's picture in the local paper, some feature on rising young entrepreneurs, standing next to a car he hadn't earned the money for either, though I didn't know that yet. I didn't know where the money had actually gone. Not then. My parents told me the college fund had run into complications, that there'd been some unexpected costs. I believed them, mostly, because believing something else felt like more than I could carry on top of everything else I was already carrying. It would be years before I understood the truth had a name, and the name was a car. Sitting on my study floor now, I flipped past the acceptance letter, past the tuition schedule, to the handwritten budget I'd made at 17. My own careful cursive, the number circled twice at the bottom, underlined so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. I remembered being a girl who thought if she just planned well enough, worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, she'd be taken care of the way her brother was. I hadn't been wrong to believe that. I'd just been the only one who believed it. My silence back then wasn't peace. It was survival. And somewhere along the way, my family had learned to read that survival as proof I didn't need protecting. That I could take anything and keep smiling through it. 20 years of Sunday dinners built on that exact misunderstanding. Sitting there now, $250,000 away from another Sunday dinner just like it, I finally let myself ask the question I'd never let myself ask at 18. What if my silence had taught them this was allowed? I closed the folder slowly, the way you close something you're not ready to put away yet. My hand was still resting on the leather when my phone lit up on the desk behind me. Trevor. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hey," I said. There was a pause on the other end, brief and telling, the kind of pause that meant he'd been rehearsing. "Have you made a decision yet?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry about dinner." Just the only question that had ever really mattered to my family, 20 years running. I looked down at the folder in my lap and didn't answer right away. "I need more time," I said. "More time for what?" "It's a yes or no question, Brooke. It's a $250,000 question. I'm allowed to take longer than 4 days." Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him pacing wherever he was, running a hand through his hair the way he does when things aren't going the way he planned them. "Fine," he said finally. "Can I come by your office tomorrow, just to talk, like adults?" I almost laughed at that. Like adults, as if we'd ever once talked like anything else in that family. But I said yes, because some small part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of this conversation that didn't end the way the last one did. He showed up the next afternoon in a blazer I didn't recognize, hair combed the way it used to be for job interviews he never got. My assistant showed him into the conference room, and I watched him sit down across from me and fold his hands like he'd practiced it. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. "You're my brother, Trevor. You don't need an appointment." "I know. He exhaled. "I wanted to do this right, not like dinner. That wasn't fair to you." "Mom and Dad, they just sprung it on you, and I should have said something." I studied him for a moment. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed at dinner, the kind of tired that lives under the eyes and doesn't go away with sleep. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he said. "The business, the spending. I know how it looks." "How does it look?" "Like I never learned anything." He almost smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere real. "I hate asking you for this. I want you to know that." For a second, just a second, I let myself believe him. I felt the old pull, the one that had been trained into me since I was small, the instinct to make his pain smaller, to fix it before it grew into something neither of us could carry. Then he reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. "I had my attorney draw something up," he said. "So it's not just a handshake. So it's real, so you can trust the terms." I opened it slowly. A repayment agreement, professionally formatted, dated 3 days ago. 3 days ago, before dinner, before the apology I'd just watched him perform like it cost him something. "You had this made before you asked me to think about it," I said. "I wanted to be prepared. You wanted me to sign something you'd already decided I would." His jaw tightened. "That's not. Let me read it." He went quiet while I read, and I made myself take my time, the way I would with any client, because that's exactly what this was. I found the repayment terms on page 2. 12% annually, structured against projected revenue from a business he hadn't yet relaunched, built on numbers that assumed growth he had never once demonstrated. Trevor. "Where did you get these projections?" "My business partner ran them." "Based on what?" "You don't have signed contracts. You don't have a lease yet. This," I tapped the page, "assumes $140,000 in revenue by month 4. "Off of what?" "It's realistic if things go well. It's a fantasy if things go the way they've gone every other time." His face changed then, the warmth draining out of it fast enough that I understood the apology really had been a performance, or at least the opening act of one. "Wow," he said. "Okay." "You know, most people, when their brother is drowning, they don't pull out a red pen. I'm not most people, Trevor. I'm the person you asked to loan you $250,000. I'm allowed to check the math. You're treating me like a client. I'm treating you the way I wish someone had treated me 20 years ago, before they let me believe a plan on paper meant it would actually happen." He stared at me, and for one flicker of a second I thought he might ask what I meant by that. He didn't. He just closed the folder harder than he needed to. "So that's a no. It's a not like this." He stood up, chair scraping against the floor. "Family's supposed to help family, Brooke, not audit them. Family's supposed to be honest with each other. This," I gestured at the folder, "isn't honesty. It's a pitch." He left without saying goodbye, and I sat there for a long moment after the door closed. The conference room suddenly too quiet, my own heartbeat the loudest thing in it. My phone rang 20 minutes later. "Mom, I just got off the phone with your brother," she said. "No hello, no warm-up." "He's humiliated, Brooke." He brought a legal document to a family conversation. He was trying to be responsible. He was trying to get a signature. She sighed, the exact sigh I remembered from the kitchen 20 years ago, the one that always meant the conversation was already over even though she kept talking. "I don't understand why you have to make everything so complicated." "I'm not the one who made it complicated, Mom." She didn't answer that. She just said she had to go and hung up before I could say anything else. An hour after that, a text from Dad. "Money isn't more important than family, Brooke. Think about what really matters." I read it twice. I thought about all the times growing up when what really mattered had somehow always cost me something and cost Trevor nothing. And I set the phone face down on my desk and didn't answer. That night I went home and I didn't turn on music, didn't pour a drink, didn't do any of the things I usually did to put a day like that down gently. I went straight to the study and opened the safe. The folder felt different in my hands this time. heavier somehow, though nothing about it had changed. I paged past the acceptance letter, past the tuition schedule, past the handwritten budget I'd looked at 100 times over the years. And then, tucked flat against the back cover, in a spot I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing it, I found the edge of something I didn't remember putting there. An envelope. Old, cream-colored, gone soft at the corners the way everything in that folder had gone soft. My own handwriting on the front, faded but legible. Bank, do not lose. I didn't remember writing that. I didn't remember tucking it away at all. Some 18-year-old version of me had apparently known, even then, to keep something safe that she couldn't yet explain. My hands weren't quite steady as I worked the flap open. Inside was a single folded document, brittle at the creases, the kind of paper that hadn't been touched in 20 years. I unfolded it slowly. A bank statement. My name at the top. An account number I hadn't seen in 2 decades. I sat very still on the floor of my study, the lamp casting one small circle of light around me, and I felt something settle low in my chest. Not grief this time. Something closer to certainty. I knew there had to be more, I whispered, to no one, to the empty room, to the 18-year-old girl who'd had the sense to save this when she didn't yet understand why she'd need it. The bank statement sat on my desk for 3 days before I did anything about it. I told myself I was busy. The truth was simpler. I was scared of what I'd find. On the 4th day, I looked. The account number matched nothing in my current records, closed long enough that even the bank's modern systems didn't recognize it. I made a few calls, the kind you make when you still have a professional license and know which doors that opens. It took 2 days to track down Gerald Voss, retired now, but he'd managed the Langston accounts for 30 years. We met at a diner off Camelback. Brooke Langston. He said my name like he was trying it on for size. Haven't heard that in a long time. I slid the statement across the table. He studied it longer than 6 digits should take. You never asked about this before, he said finally. I wasn't ready to know. I remember your mother closing it, alone. He took his glasses off. Your father signed it too. Both of them. Do you still have the archived records? Give me a few days. Those few days felt longer than the 20 years before them. Gerald called on a Thursday morning. I found it. No hello, just the 4 words I'd been waiting my whole adult life to hear. At his kitchen table, he spread 3 documents like cards he'd been holding on to. Education savings account. Opened when you were 9. He tapped the first page. Withdrawal authorization. The second. And this is when it closed. When? I asked, even though I could see it. He turned the paper toward me. 3 weeks before your tuition deadline. They told me there were complications. There's nothing here about complications. There's an authorization form, signed and dated, closing the account and transferring the full balance. We cross-referenced for another hour. Tuition invoices, my own handwritten budget, and then, at the bottom of his folder, a vehicle financing document. A down payment, dated 4 days after my account closed. I stared at the number. Exact. To the dollar. That's the Ferrari, I said. I don't know what it bought, Gerald said carefully. I only know what left one account and what arrived in another 4 days later. They hadn't scrambled through an emergency. Someone had sat down, done the math, and decided a car for their son was worth more than a future for their daughter, weeks before that future was due. That evening, my phone didn't stop. Harold first. Your mother says you've been digging through old bank business. What's this about? You closed my education account 3 weeks before my tuition was due. Silence. Then, carefully. That was 20 years ago. Digging it up doesn't help anyone. It helps me. This obsession with the past isn't healthy, Brooke. I've been letting it go for 20 years, Dad. I'm done. He hung up. Elaine called next, skipping hello entirely. Your father is very upset. Why are you doing this? They mattered enough for you to sign the paperwork yourself. A pause, longer than his had been. You're going to break this family apart over something from decades ago. I'm not breaking anything, Mom. I'm just finally looking at what already happened. She started crying, the kind that used to make me apologize before I understood why. I let the silence sit instead. Then a text from Trevor. You're punishing me over ancient history. My life is falling apart and you're playing detective. I didn't answer. I turned to the folder on my desk instead, organizing every document chronologically, the way I would for any client building a case. That's when I saw it. The withdrawal authorization had 2 signatures. Harold's, exactly where I expected it. And beneath it, handwriting I'd know anywhere from birthday cards and permission slips. Elaine's. For 20 years, I'd let my mother stand a half step behind my father in this story, the one who went alone, not the one who decided. Both of them had signed it, both of them had known. And for 20 years, they'd let each other hide behind the other one's name. Part 5. The family chooses sides. Harold called on a Sunday morning. Come for dinner tonight. Time we all talked this through properly. I almost said no. Some part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of my father who might actually apologize if given the room. I said yes. I regretted it walking through the door. The table was set with the good china. Trevor was already seated, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Not guilt this time. Preparation. For a few minutes, it stayed calm. Small talk. Then Harold set down his fork. We're talking about something that happened 20 years ago, he said. I think we need perspective. No. The word came out steadier than I expected. I placed one finger on Trevor's loan request, propped against the centerpiece like it belonged there. We're talking about something that's happening today. Nobody spoke. Your brother's about to lose everything, Harold said. Instead of helping, you're tearing apart something decades old. I'm not tearing anything apart, Dad. I'm looking at what's already broken. You have a good life, Elaine pleaded. Doesn't forgiveness count for something? Forgiveness isn't the same as funding it again. Trevor finally looked up. You're using this like a weapon. Things worked out for you because someone paid for it. I'm just asking who. Enough. Harold's palm hit the table. Every parent makes difficult choices. I looked around at the 3 of them and felt something in me go very still. One question, I said. If you had the chance today, would you make the same decision again? Nobody answered. Not one of them. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Can we please talk about tonight instead? Elaine's voice cracked. I am talking about now, Mom, and none of you can say no. Harold stood, chair scraping hard. This dinner is over. You accuse your own parents and expect us to just sit here? I didn't accuse anyone. I asked a question. I gathered my purse, aware of Elaine crying into her napkin, Trevor staring at the tablecloth. I think I know exactly what I'm doing, Dad, I said. For the first time in a long time. Nobody walked me to the door. The drive home felt different this time. Quieter, but not hollow. Solid. My phone buzzed as I pulled into the driveway. Unknown number. Is this Brooke Langston? A man's voice, careful. My name's Marcus Devlin. I used to be Trevor's business partner. I think we should talk in person. There are things about Trevor's finances you deserve to know. When? Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. That cafe on Indian School. I'll be there. The next morning, Marcus was already seated, a folder untouched in front of him. I worked with your brother almost 4 years, he said. I believed in what we were building. Put in my own savings, my wife's inheritance. His jaw tightened. Somewhere along the way, things stopped adding up. He slid the folder toward me. I think your parents have been lied to, for years. I opened it. Marcus Devlin's folder held bank transfers between Trevor's shell accounts and 3 other investors who'd trusted him the same way Marcus had. Numbers moved in circles that only made sense if you were trying to hide where they started. I sat in that cafe for over an hour. And by the time I left, I understood something I hadn't wanted to understand. My brother wasn't just careless with money. He'd been lying to people who loved him for years, the same way I realized our parents had been lying to me. I didn't call Trevor that night. I needed a few days to figure out what I was going to do with what I now knew. And more than that, I needed to figure out what I owed him, if anything, given everything else sitting in that folder in my study. In the end, I decided he deserved to hear the truth from me before he heard it any other way. Not because I owed him comfort. Because some stubborn, exhausted part of me still believed that if he understood what actually happened, something in him might finally change. I called him on a Tuesday and asked him to come to my house instead of my office. Neutral ground felt wrong for this. This needed to happen somewhere quiet. He showed up looking worse than he had at the office. Dark circles under his eyes, his usual polish gone thin at the edges. If this is about the loan again, it's not about the loan. Something in my voice made him stop in the doorway. He followed me into the study without another word, and I watched him take in the folder already open on my desk, papers laid out in the same careful chronological order I'd built with Gerald. "Sit down, Trevor." He sat. I didn't ease into it. I'd learned over the last few weeks that easing into things only gave people more time to build their defenses. I placed the education account statement in front of him first, then the withdrawal authorization, then last, the vehicle financing agreement, dated 4 days after the account closed. Trevor stared at the papers for a long moment before he laughed, short and nervous, the kind of laugh people use when they're hoping you'll laugh with them and tell them it's nothing. "What is this supposed to prove?" I turned the financing agreement toward him, tapped the number at the bottom. "The down payment." He read it. I watched his eyes move across the page once, then again, like the number might change if he looked at it hard enough. His smile disappeared. "No," he said quietly. "Trevor, no, this isn't. Dad told me the dealership gave him a bonus. A commission thing. For hitting his numbers that quarter." He was still staring at the page, his voice starting to shake in a way I'd never heard from him before. He told me that. I was 17. He sat me down and told me that. He lied to you. No. He looked up at me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, there was nothing performed in his expression. Just raw, unfiltered panic. There has to be some mistake. This has to be some kind of mistake. I slid the tuition invoice toward him next, the one with my name at the top, the due date circled in my own handwriting. This is what I was supposed to pay 3 weeks after that account closed. He looked at it, looked at me. I watched something break open behind his eyes, slow and terrible, like watching a wall crack from the inside. "He went to state?" he said, almost to himself. I remember. Everyone said it was closer to home, that it made more sense. "I went to state because there was nothing left to pay for anywhere else. Brooke." His voice cracked on my name. I didn't know. "I swear to God I didn't know. I believe you." And I did. That was the strange part. Watching him unravel in front of me, I felt no satisfaction in it at all. Just a tired, aching kind of sadness. The same sadness I imagined he must have been drowning in. He put his head in his hands. "The car. I loved that car. I used to. Brooke, I used to tell people about that car like it was proof I'd earned something, like Dad believed in me enough to—" He stopped himself, and when he looked up again, his face had gone pale in a way that scared me a little. It wasn't him believing in me. It was you paying for it. "I didn't pay for it, Trevor. It was taken from me. Same thing." His voice broke completely on the second word. "It's the same thing, and I never once asked why you went somewhere cheaper. Not once in 20 years did I ask you why." He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain it away or ask me for anything. He just sat there, shoulders curled forward, looking about a decade younger than he was, and said, so quietly I almost missed it, "I'm sorry." Not "I'm sorry," but not "I'm sorry" and "Just sorry," offered without a single condition attached to it. The first apology I'd ever gotten from anyone in that family that didn't come wrapped around a request. I felt something in my chest loosen, just slightly, the first real give in 20 years of held breath. That's when I heard the front door. Harold's voice carried down the hallway before he did. "Trevor, your mother said you came here." "What's going on?" He appeared in the doorway of my study, still in his golf shirt, breathing a little hard like he'd rushed over the second Elaine told him where Trevor had gone. His eyes went from Trevor's face to mine, to the papers spread across the desk between us, and I watched him understand exactly what had happened in the span of about 2 seconds. "Trevor, we're leaving. Dad." Trevor's voice was hoarse. He held up the financing document with a hand that wasn't quite steady. The Ferrari. "This says. I don't care what it says." Harold crossed the room fast, snatched the paper out of his hand. "Your sister has been feeding you lies for weeks, and I won't stand here and watch her poison you against this family." "It's not a lie, Dad." "It's a bank record. It's out of context." Harold's face had gone a deep, furious red. "There were things happening back then you don't understand. Financial pressures, decisions that had to be made fast." "Then explain them," I said quietly. "You've had 20 years. I don't owe you an explanation in your own house, Brooke, in front of your brother, like some kind of courtroom. You owe him one right now, actually. He just found out the thing he's been proudest of his whole life was bought with my future." "I'd say that's exactly when an explanation is owed." Harold turned on me, and for a moment I saw something in his face I hadn't let myself see before. Not weakness, not the harmless bumbling I'd allowed myself to believe about him for years, but something colder. A man who had made a choice a long time ago and had spent 2 decades protecting himself from ever having to answer for it. "You did this on purpose," he said. "Bringing him here, showing him this. You wanted to turn him against me. I wanted him to know the truth. What he does with it is up to him. Dad." Trevor's voice came out small, almost childlike. "Just answer her question." "Would you do it again?" Harold looked at his son, and for one long moment I watched him actually consider lying his way out of it, the way he always had. Then something in his face closed instead, hardened, and he said the thing that would end whatever was left of the illusion Trevor had spent his whole life inside. "I did what I had to do for this family. I'm not going to apologize for that." Not to her, not to you. The room went very quiet. Trevor stood up slowly, and when he spoke, his voice had lost the panic from before. What replaced it was worse. Flat. Empty. The sound of something finally, completely giving out. "You just told me you'd do it again." "That's not what I—" "That's exactly what you said." Trevor picked up the financing agreement off the desk, folded it carefully, the way you'd fold something you needed to keep. "I have to go. Trevor." He walked out without looking at either of us, and a moment later I heard the front door close, quiet and final, in a way that felt different from every other door that had closed on this family over the last few weeks. Harold stood in my study a moment longer, looking older than I'd ever seen him look, before he too turned and left, without another word to me. I sat alone in the silence afterward for a long time, the papers still spread across my desk, the scholarship folder sitting open beside them, no longer just my own private grief. It had become something else now. Something that had cracked my brother open and shown him a version of our childhood he'd never let himself see. My phone buzzed an hour later. Does Mom know? I stared at the message for a long moment before I typed my answer, my thumb hovering over the 2 words that would finish what had already started tonight. She signed the paperwork. I watched the message deliver. No response came, not right away, and I imagined him somewhere across the city, sitting with the weight of that answer the same way I'd sat with it myself 20 years ago, in a kitchen that had never once felt like it was mine. The anniversary party was 3 weeks away. My parents' 40th, the kind of milestone they'd been planning for over a year, guests and caterers and a banquet hall already booked. I hadn't planned on saying anything there. But sitting in my study that night, watching my brother go silent on the other end of a phone I couldn't reach through, I understood that this family had run out of quiet rooms to hide the truth in. The venue Elaine chose for the anniversary was the kind of place that photographs well: string lights, a garden courtyard, round tables draped in white linen. I stood in the parking lot for a long moment before going in, keys still in my hand, seriously considering turning around. I thought about all the milestones I'd sat through over the years, smiling in photographs while carrying things nobody else in the frame knew about. I decided, standing there in that parking lot, that I was done doing that. Not to ruin anything. Just to stop disappearing inside my own family's photographs. Inside, everything glittered the way Elaine always wanted things to glitter. 40 years of marriage represented in white orchids and candlelight, extended family and old neighbors mingling with glasses of champagne, a banner that read 40 years of love stretched above the head table. Trevor was already there when I arrived, standing near the bar, not drinking. He looked thinner than he had 3 weeks ago, hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with weight. He caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest nod, the kind you give someone when words would take more than you have. Harold found me near the entrance, all warmth and performance, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened in my study 3 weeks earlier. "Glad you came," he said, and I searched his face for any sign that he meant it as more than a line. I didn't find one. Dinner began the way these things always did. Toasts, old stories, cousins. I hadn't seen in years asking polite questions about my career. I sat through it, watching Trevor pick at his food across the table, watching Elaine's hands shake slightly every time she reached for her wine glass. Harold stood when the dessert plates were cleared, tapping his glass with a fork, the sound cutting cleanly through the noise of the room. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said, his voice warm and practiced, the voice he used for every toast I could remember him giving. 40 years. Through every hardship, this family has always stood together. A few relatives murmured approval. Someone raised a glass. "And I want to say something about my daughter." He turned toward me, and I felt the whole room's attention shift with him. Brooke has always been the one we could count on, the one who understood that family means sacrifice. He smiled at me, warm and false in a way I finally fully recognized. "She's helping her brother through a difficult season right now, and I couldn't be prouder of the woman she's become." Several relatives smiled at me, nodding, the way people do when they think they're witnessing something generous. I felt the old instinct rise in me. Smile, nod, let it pass, the way I had for 20 years. And then I felt something else rise up beside it. Stronger. Before I could speak, Trevor stood. His chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden quiet. Every face at the table turned toward him. "Dad." His voice trembled, but he kept going. "That's not true." Harold laughed, awkward and quick. "What are you talking about, son? Sit down." Trevor didn't sit down. He looked at me, just for a moment, like he was asking permission for something. I gave him the smallest nod I had. He looked back at his parents. "You didn't buy me that Ferrari?" His voice cracked on the word Ferrari, 20 years of pride collapsing into 4 syllables. "You bought it with Brooke's future." The room went utterly silent. Somewhere behind me, a fork clinked against a plate and then stopped. "Trevor." Elaine's voice came out strangled. "Please, not here." "Where then, Mom?" His voice rose, shaking now with something closer to anger than grief. "There's never a good place. There's never been a good time in 20 years. Harold's face had drained of color. "This is not the place for this conversation." "I agree," I said, and I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room shift toward me. "So let's make it simple." I brought the folder in my bag, the one I had carried into that banquet hall without fully admitting to myself why. I set it on the table now, opened it, and began laying documents out one at a time, the same careful chronological order I'd built with Gerald weeks ago. Education account statement. Withdrawal authorization, 2 signatures. Tuition invoice, due date circled in my own 18-year-old handwriting. Ferrari financing agreement dated 4 days after the account closed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply walked everyone at that table through the dates, the same way I would for any client untangling a financial dispute, except this time the dispute was my own life. This account was opened when I was 9, I said. It closed 3 weeks before my tuition was due. 4 days later, this down payment was made. I tapped the financing agreement. Same amount, to the dollar. Relatives leaned in around the table, passing papers hand to hand, murmuring, comparing numbers. An aunt I hadn't seen since I was a teenager picked up the tuition invoice, reading it slowly, then looked up at Elaine with something like disbelief. You let her believe there wasn't enough money? Another relative, one of Harold's old golf friends, was quietly reading the withdrawal form. She worked 2 jobs because of this, he said, mostly to himself, shaking his head. Elaine had started crying, silent tears sliding down her face, her hands pressed flat against the tablecloth like she needed something solid to hold on to. Harold's face had gone rigid, the kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. Everything we ever did, he said finally, his voice lower now, stripped of its performance, was for this family. I looked at him for a long moment, feeling something settle inside me that had been unsettled for 20 years. No, I said quietly. Everything you did was for the family you chose. The words landed harder in that silence than anything I could have shouted. Trevor sat back down slowly, his face in his hands. Elaine reached for him, but he flinched away, just slightly, and I watched something in her expression crumble at that small, involuntary rejection. I spent 20 years, Trevor said, his voice muffled, proudly showing off a car that came from taking something away from my own sister. 20 years, and nobody thought I deserved to know that. Nobody at the table spoke. The banner above the head table, 40 years of love, hung there, suddenly absurd in the quiet. I closed the folder slowly. I didn't need to say anything else. The documents had said everything I'd spent 20 years unable to say myself. Guests began leaving not long after that, murmuring quiet excuses, the kind of exits people make when they've witnessed something they weren't meant to see but can't quite pretend they didn't. Elaine disappeared toward the restroom, and I heard, faintly, the sound of her crying through the door. Trevor left without saying goodbye to either of our parents, walking straight past Harold like he wasn't there. I stayed until nearly everyone had gone, gathering the documents back into the folder with hands that had finally, after all these weeks, gone steady. Harold found me near the exit as I was leaving, the banquet hall behind him mostly empty now, chairs pushed back, half-finished glasses of champagne going flat on the tables. He stood in front of me for a long moment, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched my father struggle to find words. I don't know how to ask you to forgive me, he said finally. I studied his face. No defense in it this time. No mention of hard choices or difficult decisions, or every parent does the best they can. Just an old man standing in the wreckage of the story he'd told himself for 20 years, finally out of ways to tell it. I didn't answer him right away. I let the silence hold the way I'd learned to let silences hold all these weeks, instead of rushing to fill them the way I used to. Then I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out into the night without another word, not out of cruelty, but because some answers take longer than a doorway to give. If you've made it this far, I'd guess some part of this story landed close to home. Maybe not a Ferrari, maybe not $250,000. But that feeling of being the reliable one, the one who's expected to understand while somebody else gets rescued again and again. A lot of us know that feeling from the inside. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, because there's more where this came from. And tell me in the comments, has your family ever asked you to fund your own disappointment? Take care of yourself. Harold's voicemail came 2 days after the anniversary, quieter than I'd ever heard him. I understand if you don't want to talk. I just wanted you to know I heard what you said. I didn't call back. Trevor called instead, steadier now. I sold the boat, the watches, putting the Porsche up next week. You don't have to do that on my account. I'm not. I can't stand owning things that came from lying to people. I started financial counseling. Got a job, too. Sales, at a furniture place off Scottsdale Road. A pause. I keep thinking about you working that register all those years. I never once stopped in. He didn't know. I could have asked. His voice went rough. 20 years, and I never once asked why. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it. That's the first time anyone in this family said that and not been talking about money. Elaine's letter came 2 weeks later. I sat with it a full day before opening it. Every time I said, "You'll understand," I wasn't asking you to understand anything. I was asking you to disappear a little, so the rest of us could stay comfortable. I don't expect this to undo anything. I just needed you to know I see it now. I wrote back, short, honest. I told her I believed her, that some of the pain would probably stay regardless. I didn't pretend everything was fine. A few weeks after that, a young couple came into my office, glowing the way new parents do, wanting to start a college fund for their daughter. We keep hearing horror stories, the mother said. Families who promise things and then life gets in the way. Whatever you promise her, I said, protect it like it's already hers. Not like it's yours to reconsider later. Trust is the one thing you can't ever fully rebuild once it's spent. I meant it in a way I hadn't fully meant it 3 months earlier, saying almost the same words to a room of strangers who didn't yet know how much I still needed to hear it myself. That evening I went home and made dinner for the first time in weeks that wasn't eaten standing over the sink. Afterward, I went to my study, knelt at the safe, and lifted the folder out one final time. I didn't feel the same weight in my hands. The folder was the same. I wasn't. I found a box I hadn't opened in years, college photographs, my graduation program, and placed the folder inside, gently. I didn't lock it away this time. I closed the lid the way you close a chapter you've finished reading, not to forget it, but because you don't need to keep rereading it to remember. Harold called again the following week. This time, I answered. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Anything at all? There was, I said finally, when I was 18. I let it settle. But I'm not 18 anymore. I don't need you to fix that now. I just needed you to finally see it. I do see it, he said quietly. I don't know how to ask you to keep loving me knowing what I did. I don't know either, Dad. But I think we're going to have to figure that out slowly. If we figure it out at all. Not forgiveness. An open door instead of a locked one. The next morning, I picked up my keys from the bowl by the door the way I always did. I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and walked to my car without the weight I usually carried out with me. For the first time in 20 years, I locked that door behind me and simply walked away from it, carrying nothing but the ordinary, unremarkable freedom of a woman going to work on a Tuesday morning.